Dear listeners, welcome to Australia podcast Scientist on Stage, a podcast that shines light on the human being behind the scientist. A meaningful conversation with the scientist about their own journey, about logic and rationality, and the hidden emotions behind that rationality. These are their authentic stories. Knocking on doors, inspiring future scientists. This is Erik Garnett, research group leader at the Research Institute Amolf in Amsterdam. How do we get answers to difficult questions? Can we simply knock on somebody's door? Yes, we can, says Erik. He even encourages us to do so. We talk together about mentorship, leadership, how to raise kids, and how to get inspiration. What was his inspiration to become a scientist? Welcome to Australia podcast, Scientists on Stage. Erik, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks. Really good to be here.
Tell us a little bit more who you are. How was your journey coming here to the Netherlands? And where are you from?
Yeah, okay. This is always a complicated question. Where are you from? So I get asked this a lot in Europe, and then the answer is a bit different depending on where I am and who I'm talking to. So I was born in Houston, Texas, and I lived there until I was 13, and then I moved to Southern California, Ventura County, just north of LA. And I was there through most of high school, and then my last year of high school moved to New Orleans, or actually Mandeville, which is a suburb of New Orleans, just across Lake Pontchartrain. And I finished my last year of high school there before moving to Illinois for college. And then I also spent some time in Colorado, and then I did grad school in California. And then I moved back after my postdoc to the Netherlands, and I've been here ever since. And actually the last 6 months in Switzerland on a sabbatical in Lausanne. And so now it's even more complicated when people ask, where are you from? Where do I live? Where am I living currently? Where have I lived? It's a complicated question. Yeah.
And you swing quite a bit in US, then coming to Europe. But this triggered me because intentionally I asked you, where are you from?
Yeah.
Because a friend of mine who did also research in US said, in US we ask not where are you from, but where were you born?
Yeah.
The answer is the same in a way.
Yeah.
But the connotation and the way of asking is different.
Yeah, no, indeed. Yeah. Yeah, so Houston, Texas. And I feel like that's, if I have to say where am I from, that probably is the best place. But it's more complicated.
And tell us more, how was the journey and how did you experience maybe the culture when coming to Europe from the US?
Yeah. Yeah, so this was interesting. Of course, it's a difficult decision to leave the United States. I interviewed at a lot of places. And honestly, when I interviewed at Amolf, I wasn't looking to move here. I did it as kind of a practice interview for my US interviews because it was early on in the season. But then I came and I really enjoyed Amsterdam and also Amolf in particular, the culture, the way of working a lot. And so I decided in the end, also together with my wife, that it was a good place to come.
And when you say it was difficult to leave US, in which way was difficult?
Yeah, so actually I get asked this all the time here. Why would you ever leave the US? Because I think particularly in science, people see this as the best place in the world to be. All the top facilities and money and researchers are there. In some ways that's true. On the other hand, the scientific culture is very different than in Europe. So a few different ways. One, people are very, very competitive in general. Not everywhere, but in general, it's very, very competitive. It can be quite cutthroat. And I prefer a more collaborative approach to research. I prefer more open sharing of data, information, sharing equipment. And that I see much more in Europe, that it's more collaborative and less competitive. Not less competitive meaning that it's lower quality, but meaning that people are working together more. And that's a way of working that I really like. But there is also a difference in mentality. In America, everything is about being the best. So everyone wants to be the best. And in the Netherlands, I don't know, maybe in Europe more broadly, but particularly in the Netherlands, it's do normal. Yeah, be average, be normal. That's a total opposite culturally. That actually took quite a lot of getting used to. And you can also find Dutch people who feel very differently. They also want to excel and be excellent. And I think also at Amolf, I have that feeling that it's collaborative and yet people also want to be very excellent and be the best in their field.
So in a way, a combination between
So it's
the
a
two?
kind of for me, it's a perfect combination, and you see that actually a lot in Dutch science that people tend to strive for excellence and not just be average. But culturally, the environment that you're in is much more about fitting in and being normal, and no one's sticking up above the rest. And that's for me a little bit grating. Actually, it feels uncomfortable, unnatural, changing over time. I realize that it's becoming more comfortable, and I find myself kind of worrying that it becomes comfortable to not be the best or not excel and push myself. So,
see.
but it's a tension because there's also this very nice work-life balance in Europe, that you have this importance on family life and other interests and activities outside of science, which a lot of places doesn't really exist in the US, especially at top research institutions. Universities, there's the idea that everything should be about your work and you should put all your energy and effort into that. And of course, if you do that, in some ways you have, you can excel more, although you also burn out a lot more quickly. And so you see there's kind of benefits and downsides to both approaches, I think. And so for me, it was trying to figure out how do I mesh these together in the best combination where I have a nice balance with my family and home life and other interests and stay happy, and at the same time can still try to push myself to excel.
I recognize what you're saying about competitiveness at Amolf, but in the same time the welcoming, because
Yes.
I did my PhD here as well, and coming from abroad, it felt like my family again.
Yes.
Do you have the same
I
feeling?
have that feeling, and that's something that I didn't experience in the US at any place. I worked at quite a lot of places, even places that had a very nice atmosphere and people were friendly. It was very different. Yeah. So
see.
here is really a special kind of bond with your coworkers, that I didn't experience before. And that's part of the reason why I came here and why I have stayed here.
Oh, beautiful. This thought of mentality and being the best, I recognize it because I also did not grow up here. And in East Europe, we were also competitive,
Yes.
maybe not at the level that you describe in US. And I recall a very good friend of mine who could have been as age my mom, had kids at school, and she was still telling me this story when the kids were young, that they had to go to school to describe what they are good at. And the kid of the neighbor said, "I'm good at losing." And she lost her mind, saying, "Are we educated here than just average? No, what do you mean you're good at losing?" My kids were talking about, "I can play violin, I can play piano."
Yes.
And maybe it's the part of we are good, and the mentality of good is good enough, maybe at times.
Yes. Yeah, and I see it also with my own kids because they were born and grew up here in Amsterdam. And then I see this idea that, okay, it's good enough. I don't need to do better. Why should I do better? This is kind of what everyone is doing. And that drives me a little bit crazy, to be honest, because I'm still with this mentality of, no, you should, not that you should be the best. It's also for me a little bit of a spiritual thing. Like I feel I'm a religious person, and I feel like everyone has been given certain gifts by God, and that you have a duty and obligation to reach your potential, to use your gifts for the good of the world. And that means you should try to be the best in whatever it is that you've been gifted.
So to be the best of yourself.
Yes, you're best of yourself. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you need to be the best at everything you do. That's not realistic, right? But the thing that you are naturally gifted at, you should strive to use that gift to the best of the ability to kind of reach your full potential. So for me, it's almost offensive to say, no, I'm not going to. It's a waste. You're squandering your talent that you have. And I feel that we all have an obligation to try to contribute to society in the way that we can, and the most logical way is to use what you're naturally gifted at.
And the dedication for that.
Yes.
This rings a bell because when I grew up, my father would say education and knowledge, not necessarily education, knowledge is the most powerful thing there is. And so we had the motto that every day, for every lesson, we have to be prepared for a 10. That was our motto. And then when we went to school at the beginning, he will ask first question when we will come back, what grades did you get today? Not necessarily is the grade the importance, but how well did you prepare and how much knowledge did you build?
Yeah.
And then we will talk about the knowledge as well, definitely. Because he found that so valuable as we become rich, not because we have money, but because we have knowledge. And then it came a time when we'll come home and he will ask, how many 10 did you get that today? And so now when thinking sometimes we do minimum to get a 6 because we know we pass, we get a diploma. Because of that, it resonates with me less positive than I would like to.
Yeah, same.
Same.
Yeah, no, I had the same. Also, my parents were very much of that same mentality. They came from, they both were pretty poor growing up, and then they had become very successful, and so they had this idea that it doesn't matter what you start with, but if you work hard and are dedicated, then you can become very successful. And they wanted to kind of instill that hard work, dedication, and striving for excellence in us as kids. So they were, I wouldn't say pushing, but they had just an expectation that you always did your best, right? And that level varies depending on what it was, and they realized that, okay, you have certain limitations from your natural gifts, but they expected you're going to do your best and not just enough to get by.
And how did you become a scientist and start a career in science then?
Yeah, that's kind of
an inspiration from your parents?
So my parents are both in science in some sense. So my mom got her degree in biology and did actually some research in a lab working on autoimmune diseases for some time before she had kids and decided, okay, she wasn't going to have a career, and then she stayed at home and raised us. Actually, she homeschooled us when I was from 5th grade, so from around 10 or so. Me and my two brothers. My dad is an engineer. Well, he's retired now, but he was an engineer working for ExxonMobil. So it's kind of funny that I'm now working in solar energy. He always got a kick out of this because he was also very interested in solar. And when he applied to Exxon, he originally applied to work in their solar division. I don't know if you know this, but they used to have one of the most prestigious research labs in solar. Like Eli Yablanovic, who's one of the pioneers in solar cells, actually worked at ExxonMobil in their solar division. I think they closed it in 1978 or 80, something like that. And that was just when he was coming in. And someone at the interview told him, you should not apply for this job because we're about to shut down the whole solar program at Exxon. You should apply for something else. Otherwise, in a year, you're not going to have a career. And so he ended up going into petroleum engineering and doing this. He was trained as a nuclear engineer, actually. So it's kind of energy, and this idea of energy and transformations has been kind of around in my household for a long time. And he was always interested in solar, and I also got very interested in it even in middle school. I think I joined at some point the American Solar Energy Society and got their monthly magazine about developments in the solar energy. And this was back in the 90s when there was basically PV was only rich people or people who had it as a hobby to do something in their garage did it, but it was really not a commercial endeavor.
And for the listeners who do not know what PV means.
Oh yeah, photovoltaics. Yeah, exactly. Solar cells. So so for me, when I was a kid, I was always interested in science. My favorite books were biographies of scientists like Michael Faraday. I remember reading this book in elementary school, actually, and would always talk with my dad, and especially looking at these early experiments that they used to do and think about how they had such rudimentary scientific instruments, but they could discover such really profound scientific principles, even with super simple measurements. So I always found that the most interesting thing about science was even with really simple tools, you can come up with creative experiments to prove very complex phenomena. So for me, those scientists who inspire me are the ones who are the creative ones who came up with these, thinking about things in a different way, right? So, and I mean, Faraday, for example, was the one who made this connection between electricity and magnetism, right? And I can't remember now anymore if it was first that the electric coils went to magnetic fields and he did the other way around. But one of the ways he said, okay, if electricity causes magnetism, then magnetism should cause electricity. So he kind of made, which now seems so super obvious, right? It's this kind of reciprocal relationship. But
just
at the
making
time,
the connections.
Yeah, but at the time was not at all obvious. So for me, the people who think kind of outside the box and make these connections and come up with these kind of creative principles in science are my kind of scientific heroes.
Yes, yeah. And they inspire you.
Yes.
You come from an environment where science or knowledge and engineering was the core.
Yes.
Of course, we now in science, we might have and definitely work together with other colleagues who maybe have not grown up in such an environment.
Yeah, for sure.
how would you say to anyone listening who maybe wants to pursue a career in science and need to struggle maybe to find the ways, because maybe in the environment where we grew up we might not have heard about how it is to do science or to discover or to be a scientist,
Yeah.
or maybe not even to study?
Yeah. I think it's important to find a mentor. And so for some people, that's your parents. For many people, that's your parents, right? But if you're very excited about something that your parents have no idea about or not interested in, or for whatever reason don't have any background in, then I would say you try to find a mentor. And I think I had that in other areas of my life, right? So in this case, my parents were certainly inspiration and mentors. Of course, when you get to a higher level in science, also for me, they weren't in solar energy. They weren't in chemistry or physics. So for me, I also had to find other people. I think my undergraduate first year chemistry professor was certainly an important mentor for me. Actually, his son was in the class with me in his first year freshman chemistry class, which I didn't find out until later. But it was also kind of funny, and I guess looking back, I think it was kind of bold, but I actually just went and talked to him at his office and asked if we could have lunch together.
Oh, great.
To like learn more about him and how he got into science and his personal journey, and also get advice about. I was super motivated. Maybe you can already tell from what I told of these stories as a kid, going in and looking at biographies about famous scientists. Joining the Solar Energy Society. I also, in high school, I went and looked into how I could get a job and be a scientist. So I, at some point in the 90s, remember there was this hydrogen economy boom. It's actually kind of coming back again 25 years later. But I think it was Clinton who started this huge hydrogen initiative in the US. And so I got very excited about it because I thought, oh, this is the future of renewable energy. I should go into hydrogen. And that's actually how I got into chemistry, because I went to the website of some of these companies that were making fuel cells for the hydrogen economy. And I looked at the job postings and I was like, okay, what are the jobs? And most of them were chemists. And so I thought, okay, if I want to be in this hydrogen economy, I need to become a chemist. So that's how I kind of, because earlier I was more interested in physics, actually, more of like Michael Faraday and Einstein and like these famous physicists. But then I started getting more into chemistry because I thought, okay, this is where I need to be. If
You
I
had
want
the
to be.
goal, and
Yeah.
what can I do
Yeah,
to
what can
get
I
to
do?
that goal?
Yeah, exactly. And so then when I would talk to this Professor Zumdahl was his name, I would ask, okay, I have this goal. I want to be in science, in renewable energy. I'm in chemistry. Like, what do you think I should do in order to reach that goal? I think I need to do a PhD, and how can I most effectively get a good position at a good place, become a professor? Like, I had this whole kind of plan laid out, but I kind of had no idea. My parents weren't in academia, so I didn't really know what the best path was. And so I would have lunch with him and talk about this, and he would just give me advice like, okay, number one, most important thing, you should do undergraduate research, because then you really experience what it's like in the future. Before you do a PhD, then you know this is what it's like to be in a lab. You can talk to other graduate students and see what their life is like, and you get to see, is this actually for me or not? And so summer after my freshman year, I took his advice and I asked around the department at Illinois who had places open, and I was able to get into a summer internship and actually work on fuel cell catalysts. It's kind of something that I was really passionate about. And that was a great experience, great advice. And it kind of led to all of the other internships that I had, which led to my PhD and and like everything was connected. But this was really the start of it. So I would say, even if that's not your parent, find a mentor and just be bold and go ask them. He was super happy. I think I was probably one of the only people in his class that asked, this kind of thing, right? Asked advice like this on a career at a more personal level, and not just, hey, I don't understand how to balance a chemical equation or solve this equilibrium problem, right?
Yeah, how much a teacher can make the difference. I
Yeah.
think I hear this story all the time.
Yeah.
How much a mentor can make the difference. So in fact, you're encouraging us to just knock on the door
Yeah.
of someone, and you do the same. What did you learn from him, or maybe from other mentors, that shape you as a good
Yeah.
mentor?
I think for me, the most important thing is how much of a difference you can have in someone's life as a senior scientist or a person at a higher level, let's say. Because he had a very dramatic impact on the trajectory of my scientific career. And I think it's something that most students don't realize, or people in general, right? It doesn't have to only be for students, is that most people want to help you. It's actually very common that people are going, if you come and ask, they're going to go out of their way to provide additional help and support. And they really enjoy it. Most people really enjoy being useful, right? That's kind of one of our deep human needs, is to feel needed and wanted. And that's something that, in a way, it's almost a gift to give to someone, to come and say, I really admire you. Could you please give me some advice? I've never once asked this question and had someone say, no, I'm too busy, I don't want to do it, or piss off, right? Like, that doesn't happen.
The way I say it then is, if you do not knock on somebody's door or ask a question, you have the answer no.
Yeah.
If you do, you might get the answer no.
Yeah. Worst case is the same as what you have.
But all the time you'll get a yes, just you do not know it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And of course, some people are a bit more generous than others with their time or what they provide. And that's totally fine and understandable. But in general, people are super, super generous and enjoy it. And actually, some of the best parts of my job is when people come to me and ask for advice. And then we get into a really interesting, deep conversation, whether it's about science or about things outside of science.
It's again going back to collaboration.
This. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I tell my students and group members and colleagues all the time, please come and talk to me. And of course, some people do, but many people don't. And very often what I hear after having one of these conversations is, I wish I had come earlier because this was so nice. And I always say, I told you, please come talk to me. I can't force you to do it, right? So that would be my, I think, biggest piece of advice to people is, you set people up on a pedestal and think it's too intimidating, or they're too busy, they don't want to be bothered. But most of the time they actually really love talking to people and kind of instilling whatever they can, either whether it's knowledge or advice.
How do you knock on somebody else's door?
Yeah, so for me, I guess maybe I haven't ever been a very timid person. So for me, it's not so hard. I usually just go and I ask. Either I send an email or call, or even just walk up to someone and say, hey, I really admire your work, or I'd like to get some advice from you. So really simple, just go up and talk to them.
Would you like to tell us maybe more who inspires you right now?
I think I would say there's kind of two categories of people. So one are the people who are currently active in science, if we're talking about it in the scientific context. And then the second are people who are giants in the field, who maybe are even not even alive anymore, right? So maybe I'll start with this category. So my oldest kid is named Linus, after Linus Pauling, who is my greatest scientific inspiration in so many ways, actually. And I recently read a biography of Linus Pauling that was super interesting and also revealing in the broader character of the person beyond the science that I knew, and also many things that I didn't know about his scientific career.
What inspired you from his character?
One thing was he was kind of a rebel, so and actually very controversial. I knew some of the controversy, but I didn't know the depth of it before reading this biography on how much he was kind of shunned by the scientific community, particularly later in his life, for unconventional views on all kinds of different issues. And I feel like I've always been someone who is very happy to stand up and say, like, no, I don't agree with that, or that doesn't make sense to me, or question authority, question the common viewpoints, ask why does it have to be this way? Just because we've done it for 100 years doesn't mean that that's the right way to do things. And so that's something that I very much admire. It's also something that I have to be careful with, because it can come across as negative, right? Confrontational or critical. Abrasive or critical. So also depending on who I'm talking to, I have to be a little bit careful about that as well. And I think that I see in the biography reading of him that he also had this pitfall that he would rub people the wrong way, and to his detriment in large part. Something that was really nice to see in reading that was that here's this great scientist who's Nobel Prize winner, also in peace, right? So not only in science, but also had other interests and passions and felt like he needed to make a difference in the world, right? He was one of the prime figures in anti-nuclear proliferation. That's what he won the Peace Prize for. And at the same time, he was a very flawed human. And I think that that's something that, for me, is also very important to recognize in myself and in others, that no one's perfect, right? And no matter how wonderful someone is, everyone has flaws and shortcomings and blind spots. And so I think that's also, it sounds weird to say, but it's also kind of inspiring in a way to say that this person that you maybe look up to, it's again coming back to like you're putting this person on a pedestal, but you have to also realize that they're also human and they also have flaws and shortcomings. And so for me, it was a little bit, inspiring to say that no matter how great someone is, you can also relate to them in that human aspect. Yeah.
My partner says often, "I'm not perfect. Deal with it."
Yeah.
and I reply, "I love your imperfections."
Yeah. No, exactly. So I think Linus Pauling, for that reason, the fact that he was so creative, he also went to Europe to be in the middle of the quantum revolution, to kind of reach across from chemistry to physics. So, and at some point he actually kind of rejected the chemistry community because he felt like, okay, quantum mechanics is coming up. Most chemists are kind of ignoring all of the mathematics and physics that's really important for chemical bonding. And of course, in the end, he got a Nobel Prize for chemical bonding because he recognized the importance of physics and mathematics in understanding chemistry. And later in biology, right, he was actually one of the people who was in the race to discover DNA. In the end, he didn't discover it first, but he realized crystallography was the key to understanding structure of big biological molecules, and that got him into biochemistry later in his career. So he had this very complex, diverse interest from crystallography and physics, quantum mechanics, chemical bonding, biochemistry, that for me is super inspiring. And I also personally have very diverse interests, and I feel like, why not? If you're interested in something, you should work on it and feel free. And I think it comes back a little bit to this idea of collaboration. One of the reasons I like to be in those environments is because I like thinking about complex problems that involve a lot of different expertise where I can't possibly be the expert in all of them, and so I need to work with other people and learn from other people.
It's
so
exactly showing the strength of thinking interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
And that nowadays when we learn something, or at least in the good old days, we were going to math, physics, chemistry, biology, life sciences, and informatics, or all the other fields. But the interdisciplinary, the actually making the connection from left to right brings new flavor.
Yeah.
It makes me think a little bit of what I learned from theater, because we have not, maybe in going towards the hobbies a little bit, I have discovered theater about 15 years ago, and I love it ever since. And you talked about questioning all the time, but why things are the way they are. And when playing theater and being in an environment from artists, if I can call it like this, I realized that scientists, we learn things by asking the question why and try to find the answer to that. Why the nature is the way it is, why certain things are behaving the way they do. I'm referring now to science. While in arts, the way I see it, the approach is slightly different. We don't ask the question why, and if I'll do that while playing theater, the theater director will say, "You're a nerd, you don't have to ask me that, just come on stage, jump 3 times, sing the song, and we will be good." The way they do learn is they do something, they experience something, they have tremendous capacity to reflect, to observe, and then they learn from that, and next time they do it differently. Then we might not always understand why certain things are working. We do see that they are working, and as we go more into reflection, the why is coming as well. But the first part of the surface is different. So the emotional part and the living in that is very strong, while for majority of us being in the science world, we are thinking the why, more rational, and the emotion we put a little bit on the side.
Yeah. What is life? Maybe you've heard of this. It's written by Schrodinger. A description of what is life, right? So from a physicist standpoint, right? And at some point, he also starts going into much more philosophical issues like consciousness. What is the brain? What is consciousness? And because it's somehow tied to life, of course. And apparently he spent quite some time thinking about Eastern philosophy, and here he actually touches on this question of, yeah, Western scientific culture is very much why and trying to explain everything in detail, whereas with Eastern, maybe we don't call it scientific, but it's more philosophy, gets into the depth and the feeling much more. And one of the things that he says that I really like is that we have this idea that one is better than the other, and that's not at all the case, right? There's certain questions where one is probably more suited to answer than the other, and you should take from both. And I think that he also recognized that there's been a loss in Western philosophy and culture in forgetting these kind of deep ancient traditions that came more from the Eastern philosophy. So, and I think this also tied into the ideas of consciousness and how we think about that, how we think about life. That there's actually a lot to be learned from these other traditions. Yeah.
Tell us more, because you started at the beginning to say about being a religion person, and how that combines with science is something that makes me very curious.
Yeah.
Coming now to the conscience, how a scientist, then that's often I get the question, if you're a scientist or definitely a physicist, that's my background.
Yeah.
You cannot believe in God.
Yeah.
Tell us more how it is.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I've thought about this a lot because it's also a question that I ask myself. I see it as answering two different kinds of questions, right? So one question that religion tries to answer is big questions like, why are we here? What is our purpose on this earth? And that's something that I personally think science cannot really address. What is your purpose? That's not a scientific question. And how did we come to be? In some sense, it's also not a scientific question. I mean, science can go back to the Big Bang, but then there's the question of what happened before the Big Bang and what put this thing into motion in the first place. And maybe someday in the future, science will be able to address this, but it's hard for me to imagine how. And so for me, there's an aspect of life that that religion addresses that is really different or almost orthogonal to science. Yeah. So this idea of purpose, why are we here? What should we be doing? How should we live? It's more like philosophical questions, and I feel like that's where religion comes in. And then you can, of course, there's great philosophers who like Kant who talk about how we should live, and you can take that path, and it can be completely non-religious kind of thought-based philosophy, or you can have a spirituality to try to answer those questions of morality and how we should live. Yeah.
And do you experience any questions in any way from the scientific community when it comes to religion and the fact that you practice religion or that spirituality?
No, I mean, I've certainly had conversations with people, also in my own group, also with other group leaders here at Amolf. We did a leadership retreat training for group leaders, and there were a few other group leaders from Amolf there in my session, and this came up because they asked us to write a creed. So your personal creed, this is one of the exercises that we had to reflect on. And then, of course, being religious, like if I hear creed, I immediately think the Apostles' Creed or some religious kind of. So I structured it according to the Apostles' Creed, but then with my own kind of personal philosophy and also bringing in the scientific way of thinking. And to be honest, I was a little bit hesitant because I thought, I don't know how other people will receive this, or if this will be, it was a little bit personal, right? But actually afterwards, one of the other colleagues said, oh, okay, I think it's really beautiful how you bring this in and you make it so personal. And the way you explain it, it makes a lot of sense. And I think if I had been raised in some other context, maybe I also would have been religious, it's like, but the way my life worked out, that didn't happen. But I think in that way, I was actually really pleasantly surprised by how it was received. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would like to believe that scientists should be open-minded, and in general, I've found that the case. I haven't felt ostracized, when I talk to people, I don't typically get very negative reactions. I think people understand. I mean, I still get actually from my kids who are 7 and 10, but super inquisitive. And I mean, at that age, of course, you're questioning everything. And so how can it be that this in the Bible, it says this, and this isn't true, and this isn't right, and this didn't happen or something. And so, it's actually interesting to get into philosophical discussions with a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old.
Because they have no borders.
No,
They
exactly.
think freely.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes they ask questions that you think, coming back to what I said earlier about just because that's the way it is for 100 years doesn't mean that's the right thing. You're raised in a certain way, and yeah, there are certain things in my own life that I have never questioned, and they'll ask a question that I think, I never actually thought that somehow. I was raised in an environment where that wasn't a question that came up, which has actually been very interesting. Because my wife is not religious, so then this naturally comes up because she doesn't believe in God and I do, and so for the kids it's also a quite natural question of, okay, who's right?
Who has the truth?
Yeah, exactly. Who has the truth? And they're very interested in this now. Which occasionally causes some friction, but in general, I think it's beautiful to be able to talk about these things. And of course, I mean, this is getting a little off the topic of science and my personal, but I feel like everyone should be open to make their own decision, right? You should have all the information available. This is what I feel like for my kids. I want them to have all the information. I want them to know about different religions. I want them to know about people who don't believe in God. And then they should meditate on it themselves and think, what do I believe and how do I want to live my life?
And make the choice.
Make their own choice. Yeah, exactly. But that should be a place of making a choice from information, right? They should be informed. They should be exposed to as wide array of beliefs and views as possible, and then make their own decision. Yeah. So
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You mentioned you've been in a retreat for leadership. How do you think about leadership and what leadership means to you?
Yeah. So my feeling has always been the best way to lead is by example. So try to behave in a way that you want other people to behave. This is, of course, challenging. Personally, it's the best way. And I also really like the positive leadership style. So I think there's kind of two very effective leadership styles. One is out of fear and intimidation, and one is out of inspiration. And I've experienced both.
A positive leadership style means this inspirational.
Yes,
style.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I've experienced both. I think that I've experienced that both can be very effective. But one is effective and leads to people being happy and leads to community and leads to really nice collaboration. And the other is effective but leads to a bit more isolation. It can also lead to community in that, for example, you can have a team of people who all feel like we're in this together out of fear and bond together. They can use this as kind of a bonding. I mean, of course, you see this also in politics, right? They induce fear, and then this brings everyone together. It's a very effective tool. But I think you also have to be very careful with that, because in the end, I don't think it's a great style, and it's one that I don't like. So, I mean, maybe you probably know this because you came from Eastern Europe, that this tool was used a lot. I did sports at a really high level, and in coaches you also see this, that there's some who use this intimidation and fear approach, and there's some who use the more inspirational approach. I think the inspirational one is much more difficult. It is easier to just be mean and
push the board
and push,
to performance.
Yeah, exactly. To push people. It's harder to push people by inspiration, right? I think you have to understand the other person much better. You have to know what is going to inspire them, what is going to push them, and how to do it in the right way. I feel a responsibility to get to know the people in my team well, and to try to think, what is the best way to get the most out of this person? Not only for my own benefit. It sounds a little bit like only for me, but also for them to make sure that they can reach their full potential. And I think you can only do that if you really understand the person well, and that takes time. It takes conversations.
It's a full-time job.
Right? Yeah, no, that is, and I think it is honestly one of the most important parts of my job. Something I didn't understand before becoming a group leader was that the science is only a very small part of what you do as a group leader. You get the job because you're a good scientist, but then actually it's not about being a good scientist. You need to have ideas, of course, but many of the ideas come from your students and postdocs. And if you hire good people, then probably the best ideas will come from them in many cases. And so...
And as a leader, you're in charge of the people.
Yeah, so it's more about cultivating and mentoring and making sure that people reach their potential and bringing together the right combination of skills, not only scientific, but also in terms of the group dynamics to make a good environment for people to work together. It's much more about that, actually, than about... You see many people who maybe don't have the most creative ideas, aren't the most rigorous, but they are extremely good managers and leaders and inspiring people, and they can have extremely successful groups that way.
What additional skills do you consider we should learn early stage to be able to become leaders in science?
I think persuasion is a really important part, and motivation, and that's all about the insight into other people. So people skills, if you want to say it broadly, understanding what makes people tick. Yeah. So getting down to the heart of what motivates different people. And that's the difficult thing, like I said before, is that it's different for every person. And so you can never take an approach that worked really well with one student or a person and use it for the other person. It's just not going to work.
Everybody is unique.
Everyone is unique.
And then we have to build the strong relationships.
Yes.
How do you build strong relationships?
I think there's a few different things that you do. One is showing compassion for people. So showing them that you care about their lives and not only about their results. So for the people in my group, I try to convey that I want what's best for them, for their career, also for their life outside of work, and that I'm there for them, right? So being able to talk to them about work, but also about other things, and trying to be open. So I think in a way it's a level of trust. When people trust you, then they're much more willing to tell you what makes them tick, right? It's a kind of vulnerable, I think, to say, this is what motivates me, this is what I need from you, right? People are intimidated or don't feel comfortable saying, like, Erik, this isn't working. What you're doing isn't working. I'm not happy. It's kind of scary to say that to your boss. But if you have trust and they believe, okay, he's not going to get pissed and punish me because I'm critical of him, then they feel more comfortable to say something negative or give feedback to say, like, can you please do something differently?
It sounds to me that you cultivate this open culture where we can talk
Yeah,
to each other
yeah,
and
yeah.
also be critical to
I
each other.
try. And so we have these annual evaluation meetings with the students, and part of the evaluation form is feedback on what can you do better, what is working well, what's not working well. And very often the first year, people just work, everything is fine. I like how if things are going. And then I always tell people, okay, I'm sorry, but it's not possible that everything I'm doing is perfect, right? There has to be something that isn't going well that you would prefer doing different. So please try to give me something critical. And I promise I'm not going to punish you for that. I actually want critical feedback because I want to know how I can become a better group leader.
You want to grow yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So I say, and this is what I found was actually helpful, is to say, this is for me. It's helpful for me. I actually want you to give me some critical feedback so that I can improve, because I can't improve unless you do that. And then it's putting on the person, like, even the people who feel like, okay, I don't want to say anything to make them upset, then it's almost turning it around and saying, if you don't say something negative about me, then it's bad, right? So they feel like, okay, I'm getting permission, but I'm also being explicitly asked, will you please tell me something that I can improve on? It doesn't always work, I have to say. But I have found that it is a pretty effective tool at getting people to give honest feedback.
Do you by any chance then, as many leaders say, if I become in a leadership position, so mostly a function, not necessarily a role as a leader, but a function, I might get a little bit isolated from what happens around because people start seeing me differently.
Yeah, of course.
That for you?
Of course this happens. And I mean, it's something that I shouldn't have been surprised by, but I still was. Because when I was a PhD student, of course, we had like communication channels that were separate from the PI, and there was all kinds of stuff talking about it behind his back, and like these things that that went on that he had no idea about.
Separate from the group leader.
Yeah,
yes.
of course. And then when we were the group leader, it was different. And even cases where there was a very good trusting relationship with the group leader, it still was different, right? It was still, and I think that's natural. I think it's healthy actually, for there to be bonding and community separate from the group leader. So it's not something that bothered me. It's more, you want to make sure that there is that level of trust, that if there's something really important, particularly things that are not going well, that you hear about it, right? And that people have that trust in each other and also in you to be able to bring up those uncomfortable things.
And that is this safe environment where we can tell each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I am now facing a challenge that I cannot go.
And I've seen this many times, also with other groups, and it's not always completely the fault of the group leader. I think where the group is scared to say something, and then I very often would say, why don't you just talk to your group leader about this? They're nice, like they're not going to get mad at you, and they can't help the situation if they don't know. And so I think that's something that you have to always push for, to get people to give the criticism and not be scared, right? It comes back to, like you said, this comfort and safety, feeling of safety. And I think it's very difficult to get. But once you do, then it's great, because then if there's something, then you are sure that they will come and talk to you about it, and you can try to address it, because otherwise it's very difficult.
There's the constant discussion about the relationship between a supervisor and a PhD student, because the hierarchy is different. As a PhD student, you're very dependent on your supervisor, and then if you break that relationship and that trust, that has a big consequence on your study, graduating, yes or no, and the need maybe to start somewhere else if the relationship is not going well. So it has a tremendous amount of effect on PhD students. But how do we create that safe environment where we can still knock on each other's door and tell what we think? And it's really great to hear on how you approach it, and how the feedback is the first year during the PhD, and how that evolves, and how open-minded we become later on to tell each other what is going well and not so well.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we do that I found is really helpful is doing group outings. So we do monthly drinks, we call it, and then sometimes it's drinks and sometimes it's something else, some outing, and an annual retreat with the group. And that's really helpful, because then it's always, well, the monthly drinks are not about science, but the group retreats always involve some scientific content, but then you get to know people outside of the scientific context. And that's very, very helpful in the bonding of the group itself, but also the bonding between the group and the PI, and building this trust. That's really helpful.
Very nice to hear that the social aspect is so important. I have a question for you from the previous guest that we had in our podcast. And that question is, how do you bring emotion and the human aspect back to the workplace?
Yeah, so of course we've talked about this a lot already. I think it is about building these personal connections with your group members and colleagues, not only the group members. For example, one of my colleagues, a couple of my colleagues have kids who are around the same age as my kids, and then they sometimes get together and play outside of work, and sometimes we'll go have dinner at their house or something like this. I think that's very nice to have these kind of personal connections outside of work, and I think it also makes it just easier if something difficult comes up, to be able to have these conversations. It's like, again, building this trust and safe environment. So for me, that's really, really important. Yeah.
Is there anything that we have not mentioned during our podcast that you would like still to mention right now?
Something that we haven't really discussed is that Albert Pohlmann, he was he was the director when I was hired, and he started the focus group, FOM focus group, which hired me along with two other PIs for the photovoltaics program here at Amolf. And from the beginning, there was the idea to try to build a community around this topic, but also the social aspects as well. And I think that was really an inspiration for me and my group as well. So a lot of what I have done to build, like what we talked about the group trips and building these connections, was inspired by things that Albert either suggested or just did, right? So he just set up these kinds of events, did these social outings, and I saw that and said, oh, that works well. And we inspire each other. So there's other group leaders within, and we talk regularly and share experiences, and someone will say, I did this on my last group outing and it worked really well. Like an example, Albert mentioned he had this poll where he did questions, and it was a kind of anonymous, right? So you could type in questions on your phone and then they pop up, and then the PI has to answer these questions but doesn't know who asked them. So it's a way to ask questions that you maybe don't feel comfortable, or for people who don't feel comfortable being in the spotlight or don't want to know that you're the person who asked it, and then you answer it. And so then it kind of builds this connection. And I actually did this on a group retreat, and it worked super, super well. And I got asked things that I thought I would never be asked. So like sometimes very funny and strange things. Like I think the number one, so you could also vote on the questions, and so you could see how many votes, and I started by the ones that had the most votes. I think the number one question was, what is your birthday? Which I thought, is this really the thing that's most important to people in my group to know? It's
but
kind of funny.
It said something about we want to know when your birthday is, so we celebrate together.
Yeah, I guess so, which maybe is kind of sweet. But also for me was kind of surprising. But then there were questions about like my religious beliefs, because some people knew, and they asked about this. So, and it was a great way to kick off quite deep discussions. So, little things like this, it seems like such a little thing, but then it can have a huge impact in also setting off other discussions and steps.
To bring emotion back to the workplace, sometimes a good question can also make us connect and talk deeply, and not only about the science. What is your question for our next guest?
What was a challenging time in your life, either scientifically or personally, and how did you overcome it to become the successful person you are now?
Erik, it's been a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for your insights. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's been really nice talking with you.